So O'Neill will suggest that the litmus test, so to speak, of making sure that my action towards you is one to which you would be able in principle to consent if you knew the facts of the situation, is going to be a necessary condition, but not yet a sufficient condition for behaving as a decent human being from her point of view. She'll distinguish between the duty that we have towards treating people with a minimal degree of respect and what she'll call, following Kant, the idea of beneficence. So it's true that Kant suggests that we should see our interests as neither more nor less important than the interests of others, but that also brings with it not just a minimal condition on treating others with a minimal amount of respect, but also at least willing to go some way towards helping out your fellow human being. Think about our resonance towards the importance of everyday politeness. Suppose, for example, you're in an airport and there are some doors that open and close and there's someone coming through who's very burdened down with suitcases, luggage of various kinds, no one else is around, and you might just feel inclined to hold the door open for them to help them get through. It's not going to save their or anybody else's life. There's no huge amount of ethical material here at stake, but it's still a decent thing to do. And you might also notice that if you were to do that and they said thank you, you might think to yourself or even say, you would do the same for me, or at least I hope you would do so. Notice, therefore, that there's a kind of symmetry in our thinking about one another when we engage in everyday politeness. The sort of you would do the same for me is a way in which we express the idea that my interests are in no particular way more important or more central than are yours. We're all beings that have aims and desires, and if it's not too much of a burden on me, maybe I could do a little bit to help you out. That's just everyday politeness and something that we engage in on a regular basis. And notice also that you will come to your decisions about one another, the ethical nature, status, as it were, of your potential friends and others are things that you come to develop a view about by seeing how they behave in, for example, situations like that. Do they show everyday common decency and politeness to others? That, you might want to say, is a kind of signal as to what kind of person they are deep down. This same spirit that connects up with the idea of everyday politeness and common decency, this same spirit, however, might have a little bit more of a hold on us if you think about its implications. It might suggest that you hold off on, for example, the latest iPhone upgrade or expensive dinner or new handbag when you know that others are suffering and you can feasibly do something about it. That is to say, O'Neill will suggest that the Kantian perspective should also make us think about other people who are less fortunate than ourselves. So being just, what you'll call justice, or the duty of justice, requires not using others as a mere means, whereas beneficent acts aim to help achieve what others want, especially, or at least including, when those wants that others have are nothing particularly ambitious or out of the ordinary, but just wants such as having a reliable source of square meals or a place to sleep that's safe and relatively clean. An everyday term for, as we mentioned before, small-scale beneficence is common decency, and we expect it of one another on a fairly regular basis. But O'Neill will point out that, especially with technology developing in such a way that it's possible to transfer money and goods more and more efficiently to people that are far removed from yourself, if you think about how vast the extent of world hunger is today, and you think about the relative difference there is between your likely level of wealth, both material and otherwise, and those of other people, it might make you think about how beneficence could apply to this case as well. So there are over 1 billion people across the world who are considered hungry by, for example, the World Health Organization. Every day, about 16,000 children will die from hunger-related causes. That's one child every 5 seconds. So in essence, hunger is an extreme form of poverty, when individuals or families cannot afford to meet most of their basic needs. And notice, hunger can be, when it's chronic, can keep a person from developing physically, emotionally, cognitively, etc. And likewise, hunger is different in some countries from the way it is in ours. For example, the United States. There's hunger in the United States, but we also have institutions and resources, infrastructure that helps people who are suffering from hunger fight that in the context of food stamps and food banks. I'm not minimizing the amount of hunger that occurs in the United States. Right now, at the time of the making of this video, about 1 in 6 families in the United States are, so to speak, food insecure, that is to say, are not exactly sure where the next meal is coming from, and the meals that they do have are often inadequate. But in many other countries in the world, hunger is much more severe because, in part, there's no infrastructure even for helping to fight that hunger. Now, if we think about the way in which your resources, a small amount of money, for example, might enable you to help minimize that, then the Kantian perspective might say, well, actually, maybe I should feel a moral obligation to do something to help other people less fortunate than myself. It's easy for us to get hung up on, obsessed with the latest smartphone upgrade or bit of other material culture that we are interested in having. We'd like to adorn ourselves with those things. They are very nice. But if you compare the good that you'd get from one of these new devices with the importance of helping buy some malaria vaccine or provide some basic nutrition to children in other parts of the world, the Kantian perspective might say perhaps you should feel a duty of beneficence towards people less fortunate than yourself. And so long as you can feel reasonably confident that the thing that you want to provide, charitable contribution, for example, is likely to actually get to its intended destination, then you might feel this Kantian perspective gives you some reason for behaving accordingly. That is, giving up something that you value, because when you realize how small that is in comparison to the value that somebody else would get out of that same amount of cash, for example, then you might begin to think differently about how important it is for you. Notice also the utilitarian might justify providing you some of your excess wealth, some of your disposable income, for example, to people less fortunate than yourself. So notice that these ethical theories, both the utilitarian and the deontological, in spite of being fairly abstract, in spite of being fairly abstruse and general, nevertheless, if we find that we want to sign on to one or the other of them, and they both have big, significant, sometimes troubling consequences, are also going to have implications for everyday interpersonal affairs, including how we choose to spend our money, how we treat other people, decisions that we might someday make about, for example, whether to end our lives. These are ethical theories that are abstract and are discussed in a philosophical context, though, right, in classrooms and seminars and lectures and that kind of thing, but they also have real-world implications. And if you think about the implications that these theories have for contemporary issues like, for example, euthanasia, warfare, suicide, and others, we're going to see that these theories are ones about which we need to lose sleep to figure out where we stand with regard to our own ethical principles. So what I want you to do is think about how you respond to these ethical theories, the utilitarian as well as the deontological, and ask yourself where you stand relative to these two. Do you accept one more than the other? Do you want to get a sort of hybrid in some way? Do you want to choose a third kind of ethical theory that isn't represented by the things that we've discussed so far? And I suggest that you'll find that no matter where you land, so to speak, there might be some difficult implications, some consequences that flow from those commitments. And then the question is, will that cause you to revise the commitments in the first place, or cause you to say those implications are ones I just have to accept, whether that acceptance comes in the form of a new way of thinking about the limitations on warfare, or what you're going to do with the extra $20 you've got in your wallet?